Greetings. Welcome to our REDSHORT webinar for this Wednesday, March 4th, 2026. My name is JD Thomas, and today I will be discussing a recently released report from Unit 42 of Palo Alto Networks and their findings on the role of identities in cyber attacks. As always, you can find information on similar topics at redskyalliance.org. So here is the agenda for today. First, we'll dive into the recent report from Unit 42 of Palo Alto Networks and their findings in cyber attacks over the last year. From there, we will highlight some elements of identity weaknesses that are contributing greatly to the success of recent attacks. And lastly, we'll go over some key takeaways on the idea of identity weakness and how the cyber threat landscape has changed to make those a focus. Let's get started. Recently, a report was released from Unit 42, a threat intelligence and incident response arm of Palo Alto Networks, detailing an investigation of approximately 750 breaches between 2024 and 2025. Their findings indicate that identity weaknesses were present in about 89% of investigated cases. Additionally, in 65% of these cases, it seems that attackers were able to gain initial access with compromised credentials rather than other means like exploiting software weaknesses. Another striking aspect of the report findings is that attackers seem to be moving quicker than ever, often with AI assistance. Unfortunately, AI is capable of compressing the attack lifecycle in a number of ways. In many cases, attackers were able to progress from deployment to meaningful impact in just a matter of hours. In fact, the fastest 25% of breaches in 2025 were able to reach exfiltration at about 72 minutes, which is down from about 285 minutes in the previous year. The findings in this report indicate that moderate intrusions are based around speed, automation, and authentication in order to take advantage of weak identity controls, misconfigured privileges, or trusted relationships already present in an environment instead of relying on other avenues like zero-day exploits or sophisticated malware. So, if identity weakness is playing a role in a majority of recent cyber attacks, then it will be important to understand exactly what this weakness entails moving forward. We can begin with a very common pattern indicating an identity weakness, which is stolen credentials. Earlier, we mentioned that 65% of the cases in Unit 42's report began with stolen credentials, which is a desirable position to be in for an attacker since being able to log into a system with valid credentials bypasses other potentially laborious or noisy techniques. Phishing and MFA bypass are two common starting points for compromising credentials. We can see that in the chart over here on the right that many of the investigated cases from this report incorporated the use of valid accounts. Another aspect of identity management worth looking into is the idea of over-permissioned accounts. In other words, sometimes users or even admins have more access than they require. Unit 42 found that 99% of cloud users, roles, and services had excessive permissions. Gaining access to over-permissioned accounts could allow attackers to move deeper into systems. Machine-linked accounts, like API keys or other types of service accounts, can sometimes be poorly maintained relative to other accounts, which means that attackers gaining access to such accounts could potentially have quieter, more long-term access to resources. And lastly, it will also be important to monitor for old accounts, like those that might belong to former employees or otherwise inactive accounts, such as those belonging to dormant third-party vendors. Ultimately, exploiting any kind of identity weakness allows attackers to enter and spread throughout an environment without the need for malware or unpatched exploits. Perhaps the primary takeaway from Unit 42's findings is that identity is becoming the primary attack surface, particularly in enterprise environments. In a certain sense, compromised identities can be seen as handing the keys to an infrastructure over to an attacker. Even though this recent report shows that most breaches are now stemming from compromised or mismanaged identities, traditional security strategies are more focused on patching vulnerabilities or detecting malware. With all of this in mind, it will be important moving forward to prioritize identity hygiene as a core security practice. That is to say, it could be useful to reevaluate legacy authentication methods and incorporate more modern techniques like phishing-resistant authentication, such as hardware-backed MFA or FIDO2. Of course, moving to this sort of implementation comes with its own set of problems, like determining what systems may or may not support this kind of authentication, or dealing with the impracticality of deploying this kind of implementation to a higher number of users at once. It will also be important to perform regular privilege reviews on user accounts and ensure that machine identities are held to the same standards as any of the others. Now, to wrap things up. First, we talked about some of the recent report findings from Unit 42. Identity weaknesses are now a common aspect of cyber attacks, and in many cases, attackers are able to gain initial access to systems through avenues like stolen credentials, rather than relying on more sophisticated malware or exploits. We also see that attackers are moving quicker than ever with AI assistance. Then we discuss the idea of identity weakness. One common aspect of identity weakness is stolen credentials, with phishing attacks and MFA bypass techniques leading the charge in allowing that to happen. There are also over-permission accounts or old and/or abandoned accounts, which can allow attackers to penetrate deeply into systems, sometimes for long periods of time. And lastly, we went over a couple of key takeaways from these findings, the first of which being that identity weakness has become a primary attack surface in the cyber threat landscape. Both individuals and organizations should endeavor to prioritize identity hygiene, perform regular maintenance on accounts, and perhaps even look into incorporating more modern authentication methods like hardware-based MFA. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the material and found it useful. If you have any further questions on the subject, you can contact us through Jim McKee at jmckee@redskyalliance.com. Have a nice day, and we'll hope to see you again next week.